Welcome from the studios of KPBS TV in San Diego, California. We are reaching you live through a unique and complex international telecommunications network via satellite, microwave, and cable. The International Training Center at San Diego State University brings us all together in this video conference, which joins distinguished organizations located in Mexico, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, Panama, Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Brazil, Bolivia, Paraguay, Argentina, the United States of America, and for the first time, the People's Republic of China. We would like to thank SatMex, PanAmSat, and BrazilSat for their satellite linkage services, which allow us to reach all of you through the wonders of telecommunications. Welcome to our program, Generation N, its influence and markets. This is the fourth video conference in the series, Foundations for Prosperity in the Third Millennium. My name is Dan Hopwood, and I will be your moderator for today's program. I am a vice president with the international insurance brokerage and management consulting firm of J&H, Marsh & McLennan, concentrating in the areas of integrated risk management and contingency planning. Today's program is composed of 3 presentation modules and 2 question and answer sessions, and we look forward to your live participation. Welcome to our program, Generation N, its influence and markets. Generation N, as it will be defined for you today, presents some intriguing challenges for businesses and education. These challenges rest on many fronts, but include marketing goods and services to a unique and diverse group, as well as the challenges which come from what may be our first true technologically proficient generation. Organizations and educational institutions should seek to understand the essence of those within Generation N, that is, their motivations and view of the world. By doing so, they will be better suited to capitalize on Generation N's needs. Those in Generation N represent a dynamic, multicultural population, and what is occurring with Generation N in the United States may create the model, but clearly the parameters which describe Generation N will exist in all global corners within the foreseeable future. Previous ITC conferences have laid the groundwork for interacting with Generation N, and future ones will provide critical input on maintaining the health and welfare of this generation, as well as those which will follow. We have with us today 3 presenters, Susan Mitchell, Professor Lily Cheng, and Daniel Astandig, each of whom will bring a unique perspective to the study and understanding of Generation N. Our first speaker, Susan Mitchell, is a writer, author, and lecturer specializing in demographics and social and consumer trends. Her articles have appeared in numerous publications, and she is frequently cited as a trend expert in national media, including Time Magazine, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and the Los Angeles Times. She's appeared on the Today Show, MSNBC, Fox Network News, and Oprah to discuss the baby boom and generational issues. Ms. Mitchell is the author of several demographic reference books, including American Attitudes and Generation X, the Young Adult Market. Her most recent book, American Generations, examines the demographics of the 5 living generations of Americans, those being millennials, Generation X, baby boomers, the swing generation, and the World War II generation. Ms. Mitchell frequently speaks to and consults with businesses and organizations about generational issues. She has spoken at conferences and seminars for Burger King, Cigna, Motorola, and the International Interior Design Association, amongst many others. She recently presented a paper at the Cantigny Conference Series on the Youth Population in an Aging America, Social, Political, and Economic Implications. A former contributing editor for American Demographics and the former editor of the Boomer Report, Ms. Mitchell has done extensive research on the demographics and lifestyles of different generations. She has a BS in psychology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Professor Lily Cheng will provide for us a global view of Generation N and the challenges they will face as well as create. Professor Cheng is a professor of communicative disorders and an assistant dean of student affairs and international development of the College of Health and Human Services here at San Diego State University. She is also director of the International Institute for Human Resource Development in Health and Human Services. She is a fellow of the American Speech Language Hearing Association. Professor Cheng received BAs in English and Spanish from the National Taiwan University, an MA in Linguistics from Southern Illinois University, as well as an MA in Speech Language Pathology from Michigan State University, and a PhD in Speech Language Pathology and Multicultural Education from Claremont Graduate School and San Diego State University. Professor Cheng has numerous publications. Her recently published books include Assessing Asian Language Performance, Guidelines of Evaluating Limited English Proficient Students, Myth or Reality, Adaptive Strategies of Asian Americans in California, and Hispanic Children and Adults with Communicative Disorders, among others. Also with us today is Daniel Astandig. Daniel will be with us for today for the question and answer sessions, and we will also be seeing some taped highlights of an earlier interview the International Training Center conducted with him. Daniel Astandig, at 15, is a well-respected radio personality and the Chief Executive Officer of Internet Radio DAER, an internet radio station that reaches in excess of 1 million people per month and broadcasts around the world, reaching primarily adults aged 25 through 54. DAER has become well known for its adult contemporary programming. Daniel had the responsibility of marketing the station, managing its website, DAER.com, supervising production quality, and producing station programming, which includes rock music and a variety of other successful and enriching programs. Daniel started his radio career while broadcasting from his father's basement at age 9. At age 11, he hosted and produced a program for kids at WELW Radio. And at age 12, he began working as a program producer and host at WJCU Radio. He has provided marketing consulting and program consulting to radio production companies. Last year, Daniel became the youngest speaker ever to present to the Audio Engineering Society, an international society of engineers, scientists, and professionals in the radio and music industry. Daniel has received international recognition through CBS Television, Newhouse Newswire, the Associated Press, Plain Dealer Media, and the Weekly Reader. He is also the recipient of the Northeast Ohio Scholastic Press Association Award. Welcome. Let's begin with an introductory question. As our world becomes more interconnected in real time through technology, our younger generations are developing some common experiences that we elders did not live in the past. It is often written that these common experiences will be shaping our future generations, like Generation N, with a more homogeneous profile worldwide. First, do you agree with this, or will the diversity of our world make them quite different from one continent to the other? Susan, I'd like to begin with you, if you don't mind, in addressing that question.
Yes, I think one of the more exciting things about this generation is they do have the opportunity to experience a lot of different cultures. But instead of having a homogenizing effect, I think the effect it's having is to give them a greater appreciation of different cultures. They're learning about each other and keeping their own cultures intact while sharing them across geographic and political boundaries.
Let's transfer that, Professor Cheng, to sort of the international worldview, maybe some comments there.
Yes, I think that Generation Ners are able to communicate with their peers across the globe without the boundaries of time and space. They are able to travel very fast. So they learn rapidly. They learn about their similarities and their differences. And we're seeing some fusion of tastes, for example, in music, in food, in clothing. At the same time, they begin to appreciate their own unique cultural characteristics, but then they do embrace diversity.
Excellent. It's an interesting dynamic that the two views bring. Daniel, I'm interested in the transition to the business world and what you're seeing.
Well, what we've found is that people that are on the internet are extremely open to sharing each other's cultures and traditions. Recently, we put foreign languages up on our webpage to attract more of an international audience, and we're finding that people are very thankful that we've reached out to them and welcomed them into our group and into our audience. So people on the internet are very, and especially Generation N, are very open to sharing each other's traditions and cultures, not necessarily adopting them, but sharing them.
Thank you all. Those insights create some great movement into our first session, and we'd like to thank you for those comments. Let us begin with Module 1, in which Susan Mitchell will talk about populations and their attributes.
It's been my pleasure for many years now to study the different characteristics of the various generations. In decades past, few people segmented populations this way. It was more relevant to address the rural versus the urban population, for example, or the affluent versus the middle class. While these are obviously still important distinctions, a new population characteristic has emerged in the last half of this century that is proving to be equally important: generations. Today I'm going to try to outline the characteristics of the youngest generation alive today. There is as yet no consensus on what to call this new generation, or even exactly what ages define its boundaries. Strictly speaking, I define this generation as those people born between 1977 and 1994, the year in which annual births in the U.S. once again fell below 4 million. I usually refer to this group as the millennial generation, although I will refer to them here as Generation N to minimize confusion. It remains to be seen, of course, whether or not this generation should be more properly divided into two segments, the older and younger halves. For convenience, however, the primary focus of my talk will be people in the U.S. who are under age 21. I should note that most of my remarks will apply primarily to Generation N in the United States. However, many of the characteristics of this generation in the U.S. are shared by young people in other nations as well. It would have been impossible to miss the arrival of the original baby boom generation. During the first half of this century, the population of children and young adults grew relatively slowly. Immediately following World War II, however, many nations experienced a surge in births. In the U.S., the number of people under age 25 rose by 31 million between 1950 and 1970. As Generation X filled this age group, however, the number of people under age 25 declined by more than 3 million. The youth market was no longer as attractive as it had been. Many businesses shifted focus and chased the boomers into middle age. As the boomers grew older, however, they produced a baby boomlet of their own. Their children are now beginning to fill the under 25 age group. Between 1990 and 2010, their numbers will increase by 12 million, from 91 million to 103 million. For the first time in their lives, boomers now have some competition. Catering to the youth market is beginning to make sense and dollars again. This second baby boom clearly rivals the first, but it won't command quite the same level of attention. Even as the number of children in the U.S. is increasing, their share of the population is decreasing. Generation N, which is comprised of those aged 5 to 22 in 1999, makes up 26% of the population, while the original baby boom accounts for 29%. Of the approximately 100 million households in the U.S., only about 1/3 include children under age 18. In 1970, 45% of households included children. In fact, Generation N is at a distinct disadvantage because they were born at a time when the population in the U.S. as a whole is aging. The share aged 65 or older has grown from only 5% early in the century to 13% today. By 2030, they will make up 20% of the population. In contrast, young people will account for only 1/3, down from 1/2 at the beginning of the century. As was discussed in one of the earlier programs in this ITC video conference series, the population in the developed world resembles the U.S. in this respect, and the developing world will soon find its population aging as well. The age structure of the population influences society, the economy, politics, and business. The different interests and needs of the old and young can create turmoil in the marketplace and conflicts in public policy. Businesses, for example, must be careful not to alienate one group when they craft marketing campaigns targeting the other. Government support payments to the elderly may drain resources needed to fund schools for the young. And in the middle of it all is a shrinking working age population. Generation N is already commanding the attention of the businesses and public institutions. Their entry into the public school system resulted in crowded classrooms and strained budgets. Their presence is beginning to be felt in the labor force and will soon influence the housing market. In spite of its large numbers and importance to businesses, many people still don't really understand Generation N, however. One of the most important characteristics of this generation in the U.S. is its diversity. Generation N has more diverse family structures and living arrangements, and is more racially and ethnically diverse than older generations. Racial and ethnic diversity has been increasing in the U.S. for decades. Among people aged 75 or older, fully 87% are non-Hispanic white. Among those under age 5, however, less than 2/3 are non-Hispanic white. Blacks are the predominant minority group among older generations. But the Hispanic share of the population is slightly greater than the black share among Generation N. One factor behind the increase in racial diversity is a shift in the country of origin of immigrants. Nearly half of the foreign-born population in the U.S. aged 65 or older is from Europe. Among immigrants under age 15, only 10% were born in Europe. 41% are from Central America and 30% are from Asia. Not all countries have experienced the same degree of immigration as the U.S., but world economic and business trends are likely to promote at least temporary and in some cases permanent relocations of specialized workers across national boundaries. The racial and ethnic diversity of Generation N makes it a highly segmented market, requiring a range of strategies for businesses to reach them. It also contributes to their higher degree of individualism, a characteristic that I will come back to later. Diversity in family structures is also a characteristic of Generation N. It is estimated that half will spend some portion of their childhood with only one of their parents. Currently, about 2/3 of all children under age 18 live with both parents. Family structure intersects with race and ethnicity as well, further subdividing this generation. 3/4 of white children in the U.S. live with both parents, but this is true for less than 2/3 of Hispanic children and 1/3 of black children. Throughout the world, members of Generation N are aware that theirs is a diverse, multicultural generation. With few exceptions, they embrace this diversity, considering it one of the positive aspects of their generation. Even in locations where most of the population is of one race or ethnicity, Ners are aware of their diversity. Technology and communications, such as television and the internet, link them to other cultures to an unprecedented degree. Travel is easier and cheaper than ever before, and many young people get first-hand experience of places and cultures that their grandparents could not have even dreamed of. Generation N is also very aware of the phenomenon known as globalization, the increasing interconnectedness of economies and the rise of the stateless corporation. Although U.S. culture has been exported to other nations for decades now, Generation N is benefiting from more of a cross-pollination. Many members of Generation N are fans of what is sometimes called world music, for example, buying the recordings of musicians from Latin America, South America, Africa, and other parts of the world. Their awareness of these other cultures is one of the many factors that will give them a competitive advantage in the global marketplace. Worldwide, the many bilingual and multicultural members of Generation N are lowering language barriers that have impeded cross-cultural exchange and understanding in the past. In this arena, however, the United States is behind other nations. The prevalence of English speakers throughout the world makes it difficult to convince native English speakers in the U.S. of the need to become fluent in other languages. Less than 1 in 5 college freshmen in the U.S. said they think fluency in other languages will be important in their future careers. Generation N is the first fully high-tech generation. They are growing up with computers and the internet, with cell phones, automatic teller machines, and laser surgery. Unlike older generations who have struggled to adapt, most Generation Ners have a matter-of-fact approach to new technologies, essentially taking them for granted. In the U.S., a majority of young people now have access to computers and the internet at home or at school. The vast majority believe that computers will play a role in nearly all jobs in the next 10 years. Most believe new technologies will, in fact, create much better job opportunities for their generation. About 2 out of 5 cite technology as one of the most important advantages of being a member of their generation. Most young people today are far more adept with new technologies than their grandparents were, but it would be a mistake to assume that Generation Ners are all computer wizards. Most use technological tools, but few are actually creating and programming them. The most common uses of computers among teenagers, for example, are word processing and playing games. Far more important, though, than their ability to use the high-tech machines of today will be their ability to adapt to rapid and constant change, which promises to be a hallmark of the next century. Here, too, though, Generation N seems better prepared than previous generations. Their expectations of the future are more dynamic than static. In many nations, young people know full well that they must create their own careers rather than expecting lifetime employment with one company. They realize this will require a lifelong process of continually upgrading their skills. One of the greatest challenges of new technologies, in fact, is the risk that a substantial minority of Generation N will not have sufficient exposure to technology from an early age. This subset of the generation may more resemble their grandparents than their peers, fearful of and intimidated by technology. The increase in income disparity already underway in the U.S. and many other nations will be exacerbated if Generation N is divided into the technological haves and have-nots. The attitudes of Generation N sometimes stand in contrast to those of Generation X and the baby boom. But on many issues, they are furthering trends that began with these generations. On civil liberties issues, such as the rights of gays, this generation is more liberal than their boomer parents. Young women are furthering the gains made by older women. They are already moving into previously male-dominated arenas, such as sports. And young women now outnumber young men in the nation's colleges. Generation X was characterized, somewhat unfairly, I believe, as complaining slackers. Generation Ners cannot be caricatured in the same way. This generation is optimistic and altruistic, confident and self-reliant. They see learning as a lifelong priority and are sure they will someday get where they want to be in life. 3/4 say they don't believe money buys happiness. Rather, they believe the key to happiness is close family relationships. This is in spite of the fact that many of them come from somewhat fragmented families. The world this generation is growing up in has a strong influence on its character. Since this generation has more choices than ever before, its members are more demanding consumers with high expectations. But too much choice can also be paralyzing, making it difficult to settle on one thing. They have access to unprecedented amounts of information, more than anyone could possibly absorb. But they don't always get enough analysis, making it difficult to sort fact from fiction. They are also coming of age in a world fraught with economic insecurity, with massive layoffs of employees, unpredictable shifts of businesses and capital without regard to political boundaries or the impact on local economies. Urbanization is increasing worldwide, bringing new challenges and exacerbating old problems. Generation Ners will bring their comfort and facility with technology into the workplace to the delight of their employers. But managing members of this generation will require adjustments in traditional management practices. Independent and self-confident, Generation N will not respond well to micromanagement. They will, for example, expect to be given a great deal of autonomy in how they carry out their assignments. The entrepreneurial spirit that runs through many members of this generation will make it more difficult for employers to retain young workers. Generation N workers will seek to maximize their career opportunities. The bonds, often lifelong, between employer and employee were broken before this generation was born. If they get a better offer, they'll take it. Generation N's facility with technology is not, in itself, enough to ensure success in a rapidly changing environment. Ners know that education is as important, perhaps more so, than the ability to use new technologies. In the U.S. today, 2 out of 3 members of Generation N attend college. Their motivation for doing so is straightforward. They want to get good jobs. While college graduation rates are higher than ever in the U.S., about half of students who attend college do not graduate. Only 25 to 30% of Generation N will eventually obtain a college degree. This raises the question, in a world where higher education is increasingly important to obtaining a middle-class standard of living, what will happen to members of Generation N who do not have college degrees? Disparities in educational attainment by race and ethnicity threaten to exacerbate existing inequalities. Businesses interested in marketing to this generation must take into account several factors. Even if you don't target specific segments within Generation N, it is important to acknowledge the multicultural nature of this generation. Its members are aware of their diversity, and they want you to be too. There's greater gender equality among this generation than their elders. Young women have the same expectations and many of the same interests as young men. Sex role stereotyping can create a backlash among the young women of this generation.